Hi, everyone. Welcome to Smarter News. I'm Jenna, and I'm so glad that you're here today as we take a look at a story that has developed over the last several months. To do so, I want to take you back to March of 2023. Now, for some of us, as of this recording in October, that's going to feel like yesterday or a million years ago. So let me just set the stage of what we were covering at the time. We were really taking a look at the 1 year mark of the Russian war against Ukraine. President Biden in February just made a surprise visit to Ukraine. We had just covered as well a surprise visit by the Chinese president into Russia. And we were really asking the question about what's next in this conflict and what it means as well for world events. It was in the context of this reporting that I had sourced on the final week of March an article from the Wall Street Journal to share with you. And it was a fascinating report reported from inside Russia that was taking a look at the Russian economy. And it was raising the question about the strength of the Russian economy, how that would affect the nation's posture in its war against Ukraine, but also its status around the world. And it was so well reported and provided such insight. It was one of those stories that I decided to share with you at Smarter News. One of the journalists behind that story was a reporter by the name of Evan Gershkovich. And a few days after he filed that report for the Wall Street Journal and it was published, he was on a reporting trip in Russia where he had worked for several years as an accredited journalist. And it was during this reporting trip that he was suddenly arrested by Russian authorities, arrested and imprisoned on charges of espionage. He's the first American journalist since the Cold War to be arrested and imprisoned on espionage charges in Russia. And this was a very significant event because this is one of our own citizens being arrested for what the Wall Street Journal and the United States is describing as false charges. But since March, Evan has remained in the custody of Russian authorities. He's remained in prison. And the next steps in his case are in many ways to be determined. We have some ideas, as you will hear in the following conversation, about what comes next. But the goal, of course, is that what comes next is Evan comes home. We haven't discussed this story very often in the last several weeks. We've had a lot of different news, obviously, to cover. But anytime an American journalist is arrested and imprisoned abroad, it's important news. It's also important to point out how privileged we are as American journalists that that doesn't happen in our country and how important a free press is, not only in America, but around the world, to have an understanding of what's happening in these different places where many of us don't get to go or don't speak the language. Evan actually spoke the language because he is a son of two parents who left Soviet Russia and came to the United States and settled and had their family, a daughter and a son who are first generation Russian American. And so when I heard that the National Press Club was putting together an event, and this is an event that often can take place where there's going to be a guest that is offered to be interviewed, and you'll see this, it looks a little different than previous interviews that we've done. A guest might be offered to be interviewed, and there'll be a series of media appearances that are scheduled in order to highlight a particular story. Some cases when these events come up, if you're a journalist, you might look at them and think, that's a little too structured. I want to make sure that we're able to report what we want to report, not necessarily have a particular limited time period or a particular focus. But in this situation, this was a very important opportunity because it was an opportunity for us to talk to Evan's sister, as well as the assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal, Paul Beckett. And it was Danielle Gershkovich and Paul Beckett who provided us some insight into what life has been like for both of them and for Evan over the last several months. And this is a way to highlight the story that isn't getting as much attention because of the news cycle that we are currently dealing with. On that just note, in the past, I've covered these stories where an American journalist is imprisoned abroad, and it is a very delicate balance of reporting the story and making sure that we're highlighting the story, but also understanding that there's a lot of challenges that are happening behind the scenes. And this is not specific to Evan's case, but in general, what I have heard from families in the past is that, sometimes the American government wants them to be out speaking Sometimes the American government does not want that. Sometimes the families have disagreements with the government about the path forward or have frustrations, as you can imagine. And this is often true whether we're talking about an American journalist in prison, someone being held hostage. This is obviously a very tenuous situation. So we approach this with that sensitivity, but also appreciating the opportunity that the family, as well as the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., who's advocating for journalists, have provided to give you a little insight into what this is like for a family, for us to talk about Evan again, to talk about his work, the importance of his work and his situation. So that is the framework from where this conversation took place. In a regular situation, I'd love to take a little bit more time. We had limited time, but I'm so grateful for the time that we had, which was more than I thought. And we were able to learn a lot from Danielle about what Evan was like. We learned from Paul about the current situation that Evan is facing. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And also, I think it's important for us to hear Evan's name again, to remember that there are American journalists working all over the world in very difficult situations to bring the news to us. And it's for that reason that I will always continue to highlight journalists who are facing challenges or facing litigation abroad for the work, the very good and important work that they're doing. Just a note, Evan is 31 years old. His birthday is October 26th, and he will turn 32 inside a Russian prison. So with that, here's Danielle Gershkovich and Paul Beckett. Danielle, just tell me a little bit about Evan. What was it like to grow up with him? What kind of person is he like? What kind of brother is he really like?
Well, he had to deal with me, his bossy older sister. So I think he did, I built his personality, I like to think. But Evan is always very curious as a child and really driven from a young age and just hilarious, just very fun loving. And he is that way as an adult as well. We transitioned from sibling rivalry into a real friendship, and he's become the emotional center of our family, and I look up to him so much.
When's the last time you spoke with him?
Well, the last time we were all together, that was at my wedding, which was last October. So it's just a reminder. It's been a year since our family's all been together.
Tell me about the moment when you heard that he had been put under arrest in Russia. What was that like?
I'm sure you can imagine my heart dropped in my stomach. I got a call from my mom, and we were so shocked because Evan was an accredited journalist, and this was unprecedented. So it was really a shock to us, even though we, of course, had been worried.
Had he shared with you any of his challenges or what daily life was like trying to report in Russia during such a tumultuous time?
I know there was a lot that he was probably protecting us from, not giving us too many details, but mostly what he and I discussed was just his mental health. How is he holding up? Because it was a very heavy time. And he did what he needed to be done, which is report the news.
And one of the things that really stood out from an interview that your parents did was just how much he loves being a journalist and how much he loved being able to dig into Russian culture. Again, why did he feel that affinity with Russia? Tell us a little bit about your family background and how he got into journalism.
Growing up, first generation American, we were kind of living in two worlds. At home, there was a lot of Russian culture, and then we'd go to school and we'd have the American culture. And Evan is super American. I can't wait till he comes home to Philly and we have a cheesesteak together and some beers. He misses American food when he's abroad, but I think he went to Russia to learn more about himself and learn more about his family and connect to his heritage.
Have you visited him there while he was working?
I wanted to so badly. Actually had a trip planned that unfortunately had to get canceled because of COVID. And then I was thinking about visiting him in London. So that's something I really look forward to. Traveling with Evan is a treat. He is so good at finding the best restaurants, the best places to go. So it's really fun to travel with him.
What do you know about his current situation?
There's not much I can share, but I'm so proud of him for staying so strong. He works very hard to stay in good spirits. He fills his time as much as he can, and he does meditation, he reads, he writes a lot, he exercises. But at the end of the day, he is in prison in Russia, and we want him home as soon as possible.
It's my understanding that you're able to exchange some letters. Tell us a little bit about what is that process like? How did those letters come to you? Do they just come in the mail one day and you get a letter from Russia? How do you stay in touch with Evan on a regular basis?
I end up getting a photograph of the letter. He writes them by hand. I cheat and I type them. But these letters are our lifeline. I try to support him as much as I can and try to make him laugh as much as I can. So there's a lot of kind of sibling jokes that we have. I end up laughing a lot from his letters, and I try to send him family news, anything going on in my daily life. When I can't think of anything, some celebrity gossip. So it just lets us have that conversation. I think that helps me stay strong.
And how often are you able to exchange letters?
It's about once a week. I think it takes me about a week to build up enough content for a good letter.
Can you tell our audience, because I do want to be very sensitive. I know there's certain things that we can't discuss, but can you tell us a little bit about why, as much as you can, to explain the very unique position that your family is in? And this is obviously a position that no family imagines themselves in. Can you just broadly speaking describe some of the challenges around that?
Oh, it's tough. Evan was doing his job as a journalist, so that's very hard to think that he was arrested for doing his job. And right now, what we're doing is we received a promise directly from President Biden that he was going to bring Evan home. So we have faith in that, and we're putting our trust in that. So that gives us hope. And we're doing everything we can on our end to keep Evan front and center in the news. Every day he's there is a day too long, and we want him home immediately.
What's the latest on the case against him and how it's working through this Russian judicial system?
Janet, I can take that one. The court has extended his pretrial detention until the end of November. Then they have until March, 1 year, to bring the case. He's been accused of espionage, which obviously we and the US government vehemently deny. He was doing his job for the Wall Street Journal out there, and only for the Wall Street Journal. But we would expect a trial to take place sometime in the spring, and we'd go from there.
Paul, I'm so glad you jumped in. What was this like for the team at the Wall Street Journal to learn of Evan's detention?
Extremely tough. Big surprise. We take the safety of our reporters extremely seriously, and we keep very close tabs on them when they are in risky situations. And so Evan had missed check-ins that we had arranged with him, and that's when we first knew that there could be a problem. And the next we knew, the security services had pulled him out of a restaurant and taken him to the Fortified prison in Moscow, where he remains. So very tough, obviously, on all of these colleagues and friends at the Journal. leavened, I would say, by the strength and grace of the Gershkovich family, starting with Evan, but also Danielle and their parents, and also the support we've received from other news organizations, from the public, from members of Congress, from people all over the world. I think they see in Evan a assault on press freedom, a young, extremely talented reporter out there doing his job, for which he's been unjustly detained, as the US government has said. So we are just determined to do everything that we can, and we'd love to see more being done to solve this and bring him home and back to his family and back to the newsroom.
That's an important question, Paul, for both you and Danielle. How have you felt about the support you've received from the U.S. government?
We've seen a lot of pledges of support. As Danielle said, President Biden, promised to bring Evan home. We've seen encouraging statements. We have, and we obviously don't see everything that the U.S. government is doing on his behalf, but we'd also love to see more to be done. And as Danielle said, every day that he's there is a day too long, and it's time for him to come home.
What more can be done? What would something like that be? What would it look like?
This ultimately will be decided between the American and Russian governments. In the past, we've seen prisoner swaps as one way to do this. The Russians have also said that it may take the trial before they could engage in any potential prisoner swap. But each of these situations is different. So we're just hopeful that some pathway can be found that would return him to his family as soon as is humanly possible.
Danielle, do you feel supported by the U.S. government thus far? How do you feel about the process?
Well, Evan isn't here, so the job isn't done until he's here. But we rely so much on Biden's promise to our family, and we have amazing support from the Wall Street Journal and so many people around the world, and that keeps us going. We're very hopeful.
A quick final question for both of you separately. Paul, to you first. One of the things we've discussed at Smarter News is how important it is to have journalists on the ground in important places around the world who speak the language, who live there, who really understand the environment that they're in and how critical really good journalism is. Can you describe to your audience how important Evan's work has been up until this point, and the work of journalists in places like Russia continues to be?
Evan was just ideally suited for that job, and the sooner he gets back to it, the better. I think you just have to think, how do we know anything about Russia? How do we know anything about China? How do we know anything about these countries that will affect America's place in the world more than any others if we don't have good reporters on the ground bring us back factual information for us to figure out our own perspective on the world? And so, we don't want to get into a situation where the two countries that are most shaping America's future, we know so little about because of their crackdown on the free press. I mean, that's a devastating position for us to be in.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Paul. And Danielle, just a final question to you. We're understanding Evan as a journalist, and you're giving us such unbelievable perspective for him as a brother. I just was wondering, what is one thing that you would like every American family to know about Evan, and what is one thing we can do to support you?
Thank you for that question. Evan is really an amazing person, and I'm an older sister. It takes a lot to say that. He's fun-loving. He's just an incredible person. He's just always the life of the party. He's my friend as well as my brother. And we appreciate so much everyone who is keeping Evan front and center in the news. You can read his reporting, which is available for free on the Wall Street Journal website. And there's also a great hashtag to share on social media, which is I Stand With Evan. So we appreciate so much everyone who wants to support and help our family. Thank you.
Quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News, a refuge from the storm.
I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing smarter.